Hi and welcome to my channel. You want to try medium format but you don't have a lot of money? Well, I bought this 1951 Agfa Billy one for £9.99 or $12 for those of you in the US. Let's find out if it's any good. Forget plastic toy cameras. The cheapest way into proper 120 roll film photography is with a folding camera. And they don't get cheaper or more plentiful than the Agfa Billy series. Starting in 1933, the Billys were produced through to 1949, and in 1950 they became the Billy One. Now, I was introduced to the Billy range as a small child because my father had brought this one back from Germany after the war, and it had been the very first camera that I'd taken pictures on, and had been generally the family camera for the first few years of my life. So it was part of me growing up. Now, I showed this in my last video about getting into 120 photography, and I thought, well, I already had this camera. How about if I had to buy another one and put my money where my mouth is? It didn't take me long to find this camera on eBay, and after a little bit of bidding, well, actually a very little bit of bidding, one bid, I got it for $12 or £9.99 in British money, which is quite a steal actually. The Billy cameras, like an awful lot of folding 120 cameras, have 3-element and-stigmat lenses mostly, which are what they call front self-focusing. In other words, just the front element focuses. And as such, they're not the most sophisticated lens designs in the world, and they're sometimes not the sharpest. But I thought I would go through putting a film through it to see what we could get. Also about this camera, I'll show some close-ups of it, and it really is in remarkable condition. The bellows look like new, inside the back of the camera looks like new, and the glass is completely clear. In fact, I really don't think, aside from a bit of a bump on top of the viewfinder, that it's actually ever had much use at all. So I decided to take it down to Hollow Ponds, my usual test area, and run some film through it. Now, I ran into a problem almost at once because my usual HP5 has very, very unclear back markings on the film. So using the little door to read the numbers, I missed the number 1 completely, and so I had to take the film out and put another film in and start again. So I'm going to actually give you the my best smarts for this one is be very careful as you wind on, because you'll see 3 increasing size circles and then the number 1, and it's very, very easy to miss, as I did the first time. But I loaded it and I wandered off down, and I'll show you what I got. Okay, the first image I would 100% own up to pilot error. I took a meter reading, I set up my little tripod, I got everything ready with a cable release, and I forgot to focus. Yes, I forgot to focus. You'll see that the foreground there is really super sharp, but everything else goes off into a mush because I had it set at about 2 meters. So yeah, that wasn't so brilliant as a start, but it wasn't the camera's fault. My focusing aid was actually my 1938 Leica, which I kind of used for the rangefinder and then transferred the settings onto the Agfa Billy when I remembered to do it. There were other methods aside from cheating with a vintage Leica that I could have used for measuring the distance to the subject. Of course, I could have used guesswork, which with a bit of practice is quite accurate, or I could have used a tape measure, or I could have gone very old school, as the Victorian photographers did, and carry a long piece of string with knots every metre or so in it. Or I could have actually taken the 1940s and 50s solution, which was to get an accessory rangefinder. You'll find them on eBay quite a lot by companies like Watermeter, and they work like a rangefinder on a rangefinder camera, except they sit on top of your camera's accessory shoe, or in the case of this Billy, it would have to just sit in my hands because this one doesn't have an accessory shoe. I may in fact pick up a accessory rangefinder to use with this because I've also got another and very interesting roll film camera coming in the post very shortly, which I will tell you about later. Now we get into the images where I'm starting to get the hang of it. I've used the Leica to work out the distance to the branches in the foreground and shot at about a 50th of a second at f8, between f8 and f11. There's not actually an awful lot of depth of field with the 105mm 3-element lens, but as you can see, it falls off nicely into the background and there's an awful lot of detail in there. Those of you who follow my channel will probably recognise this as an image that I shoot fairly regularly, and in fact I'm going to put up the one here from the Agfa Billy right next to the same view shot with my RB67 with the 50mm wide-angle lens, to show you the difference between a $12 camera and a $1,000 camera and lens setup. In fairness to the little Agfa Billy, when I took the RB67 out, it was a lovely day and I was shooting in fairly contrasty light, and when I took the Billy out I was shooting in incredibly flat lighting and having to be at least a couple of stops wider open than I was shooting the RB67 Mamiya. I still think the Agfa has done a remarkable job, and as you can see from these other images, the detail is brilliant. They have a vintage look, which is slightly silvery, slightly almost reminiscent of something you would see from a Leica, which I actually love. So, what are the downsides of this ancient and rather lovely folding camera, and probably folding cameras in general? Well, the first thing I would say is the lack of an accurate viewfinder. Yep, there's a viewfinder, but its accuracy is questionable, to say the least. Well, one of the shots that you'll see back there, I thought I had a tree framing the image on the right hand side, and in fact I hadn't, because this viewfinder shows a little bit more than actually goes onto the film. That's a little difficult, but you can learn to cope with that. The vintage rendition, I think, of the lens is quite a plus point. Not everyone will like it, but I actually do. The discipline of using one of these cameras is brilliant for your photography. It really teaches you to go back to basics, to slow down and to really work out what you're doing. You have no aids here at all. You are flying by the seat of your pants. So, for the cost of a colour negative film, 35mm or 120, you could have a vintage Agfa Billy. In fact, pretty much any of the 120 folding cameras that you can get up to around £100. I certainly wouldn't pay much more than £100 even for a very good one, will get you really quite incredible results. You'll have to suffer the limitations of slightly inaccurate viewfinders. Some of them won't have rangefinders. In fact, probably the majority of them won't. So you'll have to use an accessory shoe rangefinder or find some other method of focusing accurately. But they will give you great results and you will learn a ton by using them. 6x9cm used to be considered a quite suitable size for contact printing, and in fact you'll find 6x9 contact prints in an awful lot of old photo albums. And portraits were made 6x9, contact printed 6x9, and put in wallets very often. This could be a very, very cheap way into medium format if you get yourself either a 6x9cm contact printing frame or just a sheet of glass or something similar. Black out a spare room, some print developer and fixer and a couple of small trays, and you are away for very, very little money indeed. So, if you've enjoyed this episode, then perhaps you'll hit the like button. If you've really enjoyed it, perhaps you'll think about subscribing. We're getting really near that 1,000 subscribers. It's getting quite exciting. And please do keep the comments coming in. I love to hear about medium format photography, folding cameras, digital cameras, Nikons, Canons, lenses, you name it. I love to hear about it. Your comments are always welcome. So, until I see you again, take care of yourselves and keep taking pictures.